What's up, guys? I am Weed, and the ESRB, which you may know is the rating system for video games here in the US, has a couple of issues. These issues go way beyond just contrasting black and white. In fact, there's kind of a lot of gray area when it comes to the ESRB. As a kid, I always really wanted to play M-rated games, but of course, because they were M-rated, my parents really didn't want me to play them, usually because, violence, gore, sexual content. Especially my mom, she does not like guns at all. But ironically enough, I watched R-rated films and listened to explicit music my whole life growing up, like my entire childhood, which probably explains a lot about me. So as a kid, I never really understood how video games were really any worse or different, being as you're actually interacting with them rather than just watching or listening to. But there were even some T games that my mom had issue with, specifically because there were guns involved. Sorry, I had to expose you to the bald. I forgot to put my matching hat on. I apologize. There was one T-rated game that I do remember playing as a kid, and it was called Second Sight. If you've ever played this game, it's actually really dark, and there's a lot of violence throughout this entire game. The game was rated T for blood, mild language, and violence, but another game that I really wanted when I was a kid, Resident Evil 4, was denied by my parents because it was rated M. And it was rated M for blood, gore, and intense violence. Now, Resident Evil 4 clearly does have gore, being as you can shoot the heads off zombies, and because of its zombie monster nature, there is a bit more gore associated with it. And then as a kid, I always felt kind of gypped because I was allowed to play Second Sight, but I wasn't allowed to play Resident Evil just because of the big fat letter on the box. And then this brings into question what exactly differentiates a T-rated game from an M-rated game. Now, there are obvious marks like nudity, sexuality, immense gore, violence, but when we look at the ESRB summary, some of these ratings seem to be extremely subjective in nature. The teen rating may contain violence, suggestive themes, crude humor, minimal blood, simulated gambling, and or infrequent use of strong language. The mature rating may contain intense violence, blood and gore, sexual content, and or strong language, but some of these don't seem to be exclusive all of the time. I remember as a kid playing the Batman Begins game on GameCube and hearing shit, damn, and hell like every other word. At least that's what I remember as a kid, so clearly, even if they didn't say it as much as I believe they did, it was enough for me as a kid to acknowledge that. And although the ESRB did state this as language on the box, some parents might see that as strong language, saying shit, hell, and damn all the time. Especially shit. Shit's one of those words where it shows up a lot in PG-13 films and T games, but some people do consider shit like just barely a notch below fuck. So I don't know. That's, of course, a complete subjective choice. Now, of course, my parents did not see this as strong language. In fact, games that indicate strong language, me and my parents probably don't see it as strong language, clearly. But would strong language and strong violence make it an M-rated game? Like, can games get away with the extreme of one thing but not anything else? Or if once there's more than just one extreme, does it now get pushed over into an M rating? I think a perfect M rating game example that everyone uses for the most part is Mass Effect. It's a very run-of-the-mill action game when it comes to its violence. The story, I know, is really good. That's not what I'm talking about here. It has minimal language, and as far as the story goes, it's pretty tame as far as maturity. Of course, it's about war and stuff that comes with war, but there's more than enough war games that are rated T. But the game did have a huge controversy over the fact that there was an alien sex scene in the film, and which takes maybe 30 seconds, and it doesn't even have to be with an alien, could just be another human. And the most that scene comes with was a little bit of blue ass. Like, that is literally the extent of that scene, and the ESRB even put partial nudity sexual themes right on the box, yet it still got an M rating. And ESRB's rating for actual sexual content is strong sexual content. Sexual content only means that there's sexuality in the game, but that it doesn't explicitly take place in front of the camera. Rather, sexual content, strong sexual content, means that you actually see the sex. And it didn't even get either one of those. It just got sexual themes, which a game like Bully got. It seems as though when a game just gets filled to the brim with warnings on its content label, it's almost always deemed M-rated. And then there are games that fall between T and M ratings that become very difficult for both the ESRB to rate and for parents to distinguish what games may or may not be suitable for their children. Bubbles. Preferably, parents should consume content before letting their children absorb any of that content, whether it's music, a movie, video games, comic books, you name it. Even though that a lot of them will have ratings on them, I do believe parents should at least do their research and find out what's actually in it before just letting their children use it or play it or watch it, whatever it is. Unfortunately, that seems to be a little too much nowadays. So even if a mother picks up an M-rated game for their kid and then is offended that their kid is now, killing hookers, which seems to be the most famous example that everyone uses in the news, they're like, oh, how could this possibly be in this game that I let my kid play? Well, the game was already rated M for 17 plus, so if you let your 13-year-old play it, that's your fault, not the game's fault. And then when it comes to being M-rated, how much sexuality deserves an M rating? How much violence or blood or drugs means the game is no longer suitable for a 13-year-old? Because at the end of the day, teen literally means that a 13-year-old is suitable to play it. Now, there are some M games that, Mass Effect being one of them, are unjustly rated M, which I think they could have gone away with being a T game. But I do think that there are some T games that don't necessarily deserve an M rating, but I'm not sure if they're suitable for teenagers at the age of 13 either. Now, of course, this is a completely subjective opinion. I've even talked to my fiance about it after watching recent movies, and when it comes to PG-13 and R, and she used to teach middle schoolers, and she believes that a lot of PG-13 films that might have a pretty large amount of violence in it are suitable for 13-year-olds. That's who she taught, and she had a lot of experience with them, like socially and how they engage. And she said that she believes that they're completely capable of viewing something like this and being fine. And I'm not saying that I don't think they can. I don't even think that, I think that there's even PG-13 movies out there that 10-year-olds would be fine watching. The MCU is probably a great example of that. But what I'm saying is, for those parents who can't make, unfortunately, a good choice to see what their parents or what their children should be able to watch and choose specifically by what's on the box in the big fat letter without even reading the content description, I do believe there should be a little bit more detail in there. Because even things like comic books have a T plus rating. There's T plus, which are probably from teenagers like 15 and up, before they go up to being like mature or adult comic books. I do believe the 4-year gap between 13 and 17 can just be a little too much for a lot of games. So maybe an everything 15 or a T15 would be a perfect middle ground for that game, such as Second Sight or maybe even the Batman game that I played growing up. Now, I'm not saying that all games now should be T15, or maybe 15's not the right number. 14's too close to 13, 16's too close to 17. That's kind of the only reason why I think 15 would be the appropriate number to choose, but I could be completely wrong. I could be one of the few that thinks that there should be some sort of middle ground between the two. I think the same thing with movies. I think that there should be a middle ground between PG-13 and R. Same thing, 13 up to 17. Maybe there should be some sort of middle ground, because we do have an E for everyone in the ESRB, and then we have E10. But 10 is only a 2-year difference between 13. So everyone is good for everyone, including very young children. E10 is good if you're 10 years or older. I remember a Madagascar game playing as a kid that was E10, and I was 9, and I always thought it was cool that I was playing a game that I wasn't supposed to be. But even as a kid, I didn't understand why it was rated E10. But then the same thing looking back, it does make sense to have like a half step between E and teen, because there are some games that might have like comic mischief or stuff in it that might just be a little too much for, like, let's say a 5-year-old. But I do think that teen could probably gain a lot from that as well. All right, so I do have a few examples to bring to the table about the ESRB, so this is going to be a lot of me reading. So just hang in there with me. Ratings and what does and does not warrant being on the rating label has changed over the years. A great example of this is Bully, which I actually mentioned before, which was a PS2 game that has had several different re-releases over the last couple console generations, all of which have different labels with its T rating. So the original game was rated T for crude humor, language, sexual themes, use of alcohol and tobacco, and violence. Pretty much everything the game has to offer is right on the label. The game was then re-released as the Scholarship Edition for the next couple of generations. To my knowledge, there are only a couple of differences, some of which being new classes and then a couple of bonus content. For Windows, Wii, and Xbox 360 and Xbox One, they added the label for animated blood, which I presume is for the science class in which you dissect animals. But then for some reason, that label didn't make it on the PS3 or PS4 release, which doesn't make sense. Another example is they re-released Dead Rising. When they remastered it, they removed the label for partial nudity. So either they decided that partial nudity wasn't important enough when making a decision about rating the game, or with reevaluation, they realized that partial nudity wasn't enough of a reason to make the game M, therefore it didn't belong on the box. This being the only reason that it was even there to begin with. The change in specificity also calls for other specific labels, such as sexual violence in games, which contains subjects such as rape and sexual assault. Yes, there is technically violence and sexual content descriptors. That was a mouthful. But the relation between these two isn't indicated or specified if you just have the two of them on there, because games like Red Dead Redemption have strong violence and they do have strong sexual content, but as far as I can remember, there's no sexual assault in the game, so they're not mutually exclusive. They're both in the game, but not together. And the ESRB website, there is technically a label for sexual violence, yet I don't know of any examples in which they've used it. And there have definitely been games in the past which did actually have rape in the game, yet it wasn't labeled sexual violence. And then something like sexual violence would be very important for people that, let's say, don't want to experience sexual violence in their game. Let's say they don't want to see it, they want nothing to do with it. Having that on the box would prevent someone from dealing or confronting with something that they are very uncomfortable about, which is exactly why the content descriptors are on there. If someone doesn't like strong violence, or they don't like blood and gore, or they don't like drugs or drinking, they can look at the content description and go, oh, there's drinking in here, hands off. They don't want to deal with it, and that's completely fine. That's exactly why they're there. So to lack sexual violence, which I think is a very important thing to put on the box, especially if people have maybe had some trauma in their past, and the last thing they want to do while enjoying a video game is to be surprised with some trauma that they've experienced. I think that's extremely important to have on the box, yet there's definitely been games with sexual assault that I have not seen sexual violence labeled on the box, and I feel like that's a bit more important to put on the box than something like tobacco use and drugs. And another note, which I will say briefly, because this could be a whole video on its own, and everyone's always talked about it for the last couple years, so I'll just bring it up briefly, is microtransactions within the rating of the ESRB content descriptors. If these microtransactions involve gambling, something that you must be 18 to legally engage in, at least here in the US, the game, I believe, should be rated M on that basis alone. But doing my research, this is something that actually the ESRB agrees with, and not just mature, which is technically 17 plus. Therefore, any game that has something like CSGO knife and skins, V-Bucks, whatever the fuck 2K money is called, should actually be rated AO, adults only. And the reason why is if you look on the ESRB website, it actually states that real gambling should be rated adults only in the ratings category page. Yet for some reason, the ESRB doesn't even look at any any of that gambling at all. And it's not even rated M. It's there. Most of those games are either rated T or like E10, or just E in like 2K's example, which just blows my mind. And I think I'll make a whole video on that at a different time because there's just so much you can go into. There's so much history on it. There's a bunch of countries that have already basically broken microtransactions. Unfortunately, the U.S. is such an economy-based country that microtransactions are just a whole thing on its own, so I'll leave it for now. But as far as the ESRB ratings go, if the game has something like microtransactions that have to do with gambling or chance, it technically should be rated adults only, and therefore you wouldn't be able to get them digitally, because if a game is rated adults only, Sony and Microsoft has said that they would never sell adults-only game on their online store. So like the PlayStation Store, the Microsoft Xbox Live Store. And I know Steam will do adults-only, but a lot of stores like GameStop, Walmart, Target, they will not allow adults-only games on their shelves. Post-recording Jake here. Real quick, I just wanted to indicate while I was doing research and finding all of the videos and clips I was going to use, I did realize that the ESRB now technically does have an indication at the bottom of their content descriptor that says in-game purchases includes random items. I guess this is kind of a step in the right direction, but that technically still goes against their whole gambling AO situation. So I just wanted to bring that up after I realized that the ESRB has technically done something, but I still don't think it's enough. Which brings me to probably my last big issue with the ESRB and just ratings alone is rating something adults only and then a lot of places denying the release on their store shelves or digital shelves now is a type of censorship. If a game comes out and it gets rated adults only, a good example was San Andreas was going to get rated adults only because it had that coffee mod or whatever the fuck it was called where you could have sex as like a mini game. As stupid as that is, it's still art. It's still something that I believe shouldn't be censored. If you want to include whatever you want to include in your game, you should be free to. Art should be art, regardless of what other people think, regardless of what I think, what the sellers think. But in a way, by denying adults-only games on your storefronts, you're denying the ability for people to make choices that could turn their game into an adults-only game. So when developers are making their games, they specifically strive to keep away from an adults-only rating. Now, a lot of the time when something gets rated adults-only, usually it's because it just straight up has some form of porn on it, or in the example of the game Hatred that came out years ago, the entire purpose of that game is to kill civilians, even though it's no more violent than GTA could be. Because its whole purpose is to kill civilians, it got an adults only rating. Regardless, that means that even if that game planned on coming out on PlayStation and Xbox on the digital store, it now never will, simply because Steam is the only place that will allow adults-only games on there. And of course, Steam has all of its own issues with what games it allows on there, which is anything at this point, regardless of if it's a heaping pile of trash or not. My dog fell asleep. He's snoring over there. I wonder if I can get him snoring. I'm not sure if I got that or not, but he was dreaming. So he was kicking his legs and everything. It was pretty funny. But I forgot what I was saying. But basically the important part is the ESRB, whether they're trying to or not, is in some way a type of censorship. And it's not the ESRB's fault. It's more or less the companies that actually sell the product outright, so Microsoft, PlayStation. Unfortunately, adults only has gotten a bad rap. Specifically, like I said, a lot of AO games are basically just straight up porn, or, you know, the whole purpose of it is just straight up violence. In Manhunt's example, like, is probably one of the most famous ones of all, is that it was rated AO, and then they had to change it and censor a lot of it in order to get it an M rating so that they could actually sell it. The only way to actually get the AO game is to get it on PC. And then even then, if you buy it from the wrong buyer, you technically get the censored version. So it's one of those things where now game developers have always had to jump through hoops and censor the games that they made specifically to get it on store shelves so they can make their money back on development. And whether or not you agree that these games should or should not exist, which really I don't think it matters whether you believe it should or not. Again, that's just my opinion. And unfortunately, because of the way the rating system and the online stores are, it does cause a little bit of censorship. And on top of that, the ESRB isn't nearly as structurally sound as I think everyone has assumed they would be. And obviously this goes all the way back to when the ESRB started back in the 80s. So I could just keep rambling on, but I think I'll probably close everything up here. So obviously I am very much against censorship. I think regardless of if you enjoy it or if you like it or if you're against it, whatever it may be in your instance for this specific scenario, then just don't engage in it. It's not meant for you then. It's meant for someone else, and don't take away someone else's enjoyment just because you don't like it. That's pretty much all I got to say about that. That's my rant summed up. I hope this video is not too long. I've been recording for a fucking half hour now. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to me rant about shit that I really care about. So if you take any time at all to listen to me talk, I do really appreciate it. I want to see what you guys have ideas on this. What are your guys' ideas? Do you think I'm just batshit crazy and making stuff up out of my ass? Do you think I have some sort of point here? Do you think I just wasted a half hour of your time for no reason? Please comment down below and let me know what you think. Let me know if you enjoyed the video, if you think the ESRB should change, if you think it's perfect the way it is. I'm really curious to know if I'm the only one that thinks like this, or if there's other people out there that also think the ESRB has a couple of issues. On top of that, if you could, while you're down there, hit like and subscribe if you're interested in viewing more of my videos. I do really appreciate everything you do, whether it's comment, like, subscribe. So I'll stop talking now. Thank you guys so much. Have a good one. See ya.